Well, I'd like to redirect your attention right now with a question. What do horses, fear, and goats have to do with dentistry? And let's begin with fear. I want you to take a moment right now to think back of a time in your life where you experienced fear. You got really scared and how you reacted. What actions did you take? How did you feel? Take a moment right now to go back to that episode and think about it. I'd like to share such a moment with you right now. In 1998, there was an ice storm that covered all of Eastern Canada and many northeastern United States. For 3 days nonstop, it rained, freezing rain. And as the ice built up on everything outdoors, our lives started to collapse. Mature trees broke like toothpicks. Power lines snapped. Hydro towers collapsed under the weight of the ice. There were power failures everywhere that lasted for weeks after the storm ended. People died. My business partner's neighbor died. My own mother had a close brush with death. It was a nightmare. But on the fourth day, when the sun came out, the nightmare gave way to magic. Everywhere you looked, glittered under the sun like diamonds and crystals. I used to be a competitive rider back then, and my 5-year-old horse had just completed his first season of competition, finishing reserve champion in our region, which was something I was really proud of because I had trained him from day one, from the day he was born. He was super smart, super athletic, and very fit. And he was used to be under saddle or being worked 6 days a week and spend several hours outdoors every day. And now he had been confined to his 10x10 stall for 3 days. I had to do something about this. I drove to the equestrian park where I kept him. And as soon as I drove onto the property, it became immediately obvious that there was no way I was going to be able to turn him out because every single paddock I looked at looked like a hockey rink. And when I went to the arena, it became immediately obvious that I was not going to be able to ride there because as soon as the door shut behind me, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. There was no electricity, no light. That left only one option. I was going to ride my horse. I took him out of his stall. I groomed him. I tacked him up. I put corks on his shoes for added traction, and off we went. We headed west, and I suddenly felt like a princess in a fairy tale. The beast underneath my seat felt wonderful, full of energy, bouncy and obedient. And everywhere I looked were crystals and diamonds glittering under the sun. The air smelled so clean. There was nobody around. It was wonderful. When we reached the far western edge of the property, we turned north, and at the northwest corner, I decided it was time to come back to the barn. We were the farthest away possible from the barn. And I decided to come back through the wooded area there. As I entered the wood, I met a new level of magic. The trees bent over from the weight of the ice, formed arches and tunnels over the paths on which we rode. I had never seen a scene of such beauty. It was incredibly beautiful. But then I heard a weird sound coming over there, and my horse twitched a little bit. And shortly after, I heard a similar sound coming over there, and my horse twitched a little bit more. And then again, directly behind us, and my horse twitched more. I didn't know what was going on, didn't know what these noises were all about, but the sun was now high up, warming everything. And as a result, the sleeves of ice slipped off the tree branches and crashed to the ground like broken dishes. And now we were surrounded by these sounds. And my horse had grown in tension and in size under my seat, and he now felt like a nuclear reactor about to explode. I was so scared, and I couldn't dismount. I had no traction on my riding boots. Maybe I should have put the corks on my shoes, not his. But this is also when the panic monster struck. It was like, what were you thinking, you idiot? Riding in conditions like this? Do you see anybody around? No, you're going to get us killed. What were you thinking? And then a somewhat more reasonable voice came into my head. It was the voice of my first riding instructor. Barbara was her name. She was a tall woman with a booming voice. And I heard her tell me, sit up, look up. Mind you, she usually said that when I was already hanging from my horse's neck, about to fall to the ground. Nevertheless, I took a deep breath. I sat a little deeper in the saddle and I looked up. And then I remembered an interview I had seen on television not long before the ice storm. It was an interview of Kira Kirkland. Kira was one of the top dressage riders in the world back then. And the interviewer asked her, Kira, what is your secret in producing exquisite piaffe and passage, horse after horse, you bring into this arena? Before I give you Kira's answer, I need to explain what piaffe and passage are. This is an example given to us by Catherine Dufour, who is the rising star, the current rising star in dressage after the Tokyo Olympics. Let's have a look.
So for Denmark, Catherine Dufour and Utterupgard's Cassidy.
This is passage, a very lofty airborne trot. And now she's transitioning into piaffe on the spot. And now passage again. Isn't that gorgeous? She is such a beautiful rider. Now, back to the interview. Kira, what's your secret? And Kira tossed her head back, laughing. She says, it's really simple. All you need to do is take 10 horses and riders on a hack, and when you're the farthest away from the barn, you send 9 horses and riders back to the barn. And the 10th horse learns to piaffe. Well, here I was, the farthest possible away from the barn, sitting on a horse whose fixation had become to run to the barn, belly to the ground as fast as he could. And there was no way we could do it at his speed. It would have killed us both. So I had no choice. And I chose this picture you see on your screen because this is an important one. I had been holding back on my horse's reins really tight, telling him, no, you can't go, no, you can't go. And remembering my first riding instructor and Kira Kirkland's word, I remembered that it was now important to agree with my horse, to put my legs on, to tell him, yeah, I want to go back to the barn too. And as soon as he bolted forward, I had to hold back to him and say, no, not like this. And I repeated the aids. Pressure from both legs on means forward. He bolted again. I held him back. I said, no, not like that. And with my aids, sure enough, I redirected his attention away from the fear to my aids, to the very first lessons, the very basic, simple lessons that he had learned when he was first under saddle. Leg pressure means forward, rein pressure means stop. And as I repeated this cycle of aids, sure enough, I got the first elevated step. And I praised him. Good horse, yes. And you know what? You get more of what you praise. So I kept on repeating the aids. Go forward. Yeah, nice. go forward. Yes, beautiful. And that day, we found our way back to the barn instead of on the obituary column. We found our way back to the barn in Piaf and Passage on a 5-year-old horse, doing a movement that is usually taught to horses that are 8 or 9 years old. Now, for the next 8 years, I shared this story only within the small circle of riding friends I had, because who really cares about Piaf and Passage, right? This all changed in 2006 when I was in a retreat in Washington State. On the first day of that retreat, we were asked to break out in pairs and share a story of fear, an experience of fear that we've had and how we reacted to it, how we felt about it. And the very first story that came to my mind was this one. But then I was very ambivalent because this was a retreat for dentists. And the person sitting in front of me was a dentist. And I didn't think it was appropriate to share this story with a dentist. But as hard as I couldn't find another story that was more vivid than this one. So I went ahead and shared it. And for the rest of the day, I didn't feel quite right. There was something inside me that was calling for my attention, and I didn't know what it was. And it stayed with me the whole day into the night. I barely slept that night and into the next day. Until the next afternoon, we had some time off, and I decided to go for a hike, not a hack, in the Cascade Mountains. And as I hiked in that beautiful setting high up in the Cascade Mountains, I reflected on my life, on my past, my present, my futures, my ambitions, my dreams, my goals. And suddenly it dawned on me that my attention had been redirected. And I was not at all where I wanted to be. I was lost. Not on that mountain, but lost in my life. But a little bit like that goat who'd been caught browsing and grazing and not paying attention, realizing that, oh man, I wanted to be over there. What am I doing here? And that's exactly how I felt. Because you see, when I had entered dental school, I wanted to be a physician of the mouth. In Université de Montréal, my alma mater, back then, and I think still today, for the first 2 years, dental students and medical students have many courses together. Many of my friends were studying to become physicians, and I was going to be a physician of the mouth. But that day on the Cascade Mountain trails, I couldn't even tell when or how my attention had been redirected away from being a physician of the mouth to being a mouth mechanic. I'd become a carpenter. And that was very painful. And what was even more painful is I realized that I had really only served a very small population of people who could afford to pay for my care. And actually, what you see on your screen would have felt good because it really felt more like this. And I'm afraid of heights. Like many births, the birth of this new awareness gave way to a postpartum depression. It was a very dark time for me, and I fought that depression for a long time. And the continuing education courses to which I was so addicted. I took 10 times more continuing education courses than I needed to maintain my license. All of a sudden, they were losing their appeal. I went and sat for 5-10 minutes and I left. I couldn't stay. It was a dark, dark time until I chose to redirect my attention away from a past that I couldn't change. You all know that. We cannot change the past. And focus forward on the present and a future that possibly we can change. And as a result of this new focus, I joined new organizations that have not much to do with dentistry. I joined ALIA, Authentic Leadership in Action. I joined the Presencing Institute, to which I still belong. And I started attending those meetings. I met people from all walks of life, from all over the globe, aware for the need of change and seeking ways to lead change. What struck me was in every one of those meetings, except for one, I have been the only dentist. And this is worrisome because studies have shown that there is a discrepancy in the perception of trust and value in dentistry, and an important one. This is a study that was done in Canada more than 10 years ago, and I'm just making assumptions here, but I assume that study applies here as well. What was revealed in that study is that we dentists believe that we are worthy of trust and that the services we render are of high value. But the general public doesn't believe so. The general public doesn't think that we're trustworthy, and they don't see high value in the services we provide. There is a need to lead change in dentistry. And as I gathered more and more information in my research about leading change in dentistry and what needs to change in dentistry, I came upon other troublesome facts that our attention is being redirected all the time. Kristen Kearns, who's at University of California, San Francisco, has uncovered many of those truths that show that powerful forces with deep wallets and interests, financial interests in policy changes, have been interfering with the World Health Organization for decades in establishing policies regarding sugar intake. And there's so much more. Marketing and even propaganda redirects our attention all the time into believing that certain choices are healthy and they're not. So how do we go about all of this? Well, that asks for me to go back to my initial question of what do horses, fear, and goats have to do with dentistry? And the answer is everything. I see many parallels between the 1998 ice storm and the pandemic. And the feeling we all share right now is very similar to the feeling my horse and myself had in 1998, wanting to go back to the barn. We all want to go back to pre-pandemic life. We all want to go back to normal. But normal wasn't that great before the pandemic. We had issues, people, trust and value issues. And they haven't changed with the addition of high volume suctions and plexiglass shields in your office. Those issues are still there. What are we going to do about that? Well, here's what I think we can do. Is like redirecting my horse's attention to his very first basic, simple, easy to understand lessons. Maybe we can go back to our early lessons when we entered dental school. Our first year, histology, anatomy. Enamel is a very unique tissue, unlike any other body parts. It is more than 2.5 times harder than bones, but it is acellular. It doesn't have any possibility of regenerating itself. And anatomy, this, my friends, is the gateway to the body, the gateway to health and nutrition and communication. And we all work here. This is the confluence of health, dentistry, and medicine. This is the confluence of tooth decay and metabolic disease. So if we ask ourselves simple questions with this reminder what does it start to look like? Caries. Fillings? Caries. Fluoride? Caries. More brushing, more flossing? Maybe these are all good answers, but there's more to it. Like leg pressure for a well-schooled horse eventually means walk, trot, canter, piaffe, and passage. Perhaps there are more answers to the disease we know as caries in dentistry. And perhaps if we come together, we can come up with new solutions. Perhaps when we come together, we can teach dentistry to piaffe and passage and show up on the other side of the pandemic as an elevated version of ourselves. What is it we can do to change or to shape the future of dentistry so that we can serve better and more people? So I was asked to give this presentation today because the true goal is for me to come back in person. And I do hope that the organizers of this session are not going to change their mind after they've seen this presentation of introducing horses and goats into dentistry. But the idea is to come together sometime next year on the other side of the pandemic in person and work together in an interactive presentation / workshop to start coming with some new answers to caries together. I'd like to leave you with this quote. The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. It will depend largely on the quality of our attention and the quality of our vision into the future. We are physicians of the mouth, and let's learn to show up that way. Thank you for your attention.